Hello, my name is Ian Watson. I'm the Executive Director of the American Membrane Technology Association, also known as AMTA. Our association is a technical association that was founded originally in the early 70s under a different name to promote the use of membrane technology and other advanced water treatment sciences to improve water supplies, initially in the United States, but later, because of interest we received from the international community throughout the world. During the next 20 or so years, a number of other organizations started, and it was seen fit to try and combine at least some of these organizations into one international voice of advocacy for desalination, water reuse, the use of membrane technology, the use of thermal technology to improve water supplies around the world. The result of that was the formation of the International Desalination Association. It was formed from two groups, the International Desalination and Environmental Association and the original association of AMTA. AMTA, under a new name, or its original name actually, the National Water Supply Improvement Association, became an affiliate, the North American affiliate of IDA. And today we are in the IDA's offices in Topsfield, Massachusetts, and we're talking to three of the people who I've known for many years, I won't say how many, to talk about the original association that all of us were involved in at one time or another, and the current association, and the importance of having a voice of advocacy for the transfer of this technology to people who really need the end result, that have water supply issues, have water quality issues, and how they accomplish that and how the organization is run. So, I have real pleasure in introducing these three people. Leon Awerbuch, who was one of the early participants in the National Water Supply Improvement Association, was one of the driving forces in the formation of IDA, and has served with distinction on that board of directors for many, many years. Ms. Patricia Burke, who was the first executive director of NWSIA, the National Water Supply Improvement Association. She worked in the industry for a while, and as did Leon, and then has since that day when she became the executive director of NWSIA, has pretty much been at the forefront of this technology transfer and advocacy movement. And finally, but not leastly, Jim Burkett, who I've known also for many years. He has been a consultant in the industry, working with the Arthur D. Little Company, and now has retired, lives in some remote outpost in the state of Maine, and operates his own consultancy. Jim has also been very active in the affairs of IDA over the last many, many years. And it's a great pleasure for us to have him here today. I'd like to ask each of you to give us a little history, personal history, how you became involved in the technology, what you've been doing over the years, what you're doing now, and also your involvement in IDA. I'll start with you, Jim.
Thank you, Ian. I became involved in desalination by some happy accident. I took my PhD in physical chemistry from Yale University and went to work for the consulting firm of Arthur D. Little, thinking that I would be an electrochemist, batteries, fuel cells, electroplating, that sort of thing, but also corrosion. And then in the late 60s, Arthur D. Little had a consulting job with the old Office of Saline Water to look at corrosion rates and materials behavior in multi-stage flash and other operating plants. And that was sort of the beginning, because as we conducted these surveys, we proceeded from collecting materials behavior to operating data, to staffing levels, to prices, to energy consumption. And new technologies appeared, and suddenly we found ourselves just involved in all of the technologies and in all of the places. And this was not an example of career planning, but I'm very grateful for it. It's worked out really well. And at some point along the way, I fell in with bad company by attending one of the Nuisia conferences. Slowly got drawn into that and went on the board of Nuisia, went on the board of IDEA in '81. And so then I was present when we amalgamated these groups. And let me make one slight refinement to your statement of these two groups. This was, in fact, almost an ill-fated three-cornered kiss. There was a third group involved, which was the Working Party on Fresh Water from the Sea, which was a special subcommittee of the European Federation of Chemical Engineers. We tried to draw them into our combined thing with some difficulty because, for one thing, they were Europeans, but for another, they didn't exist. They were a special committee. They were not an organization. They did not have members. They sort of had delegates from all of the European chemical engineering organizations. So although we drew them in at one point to become the European affiliate, original European affiliate, after a couple years in existence, we parted company. So we ended up being more of the two entities. You mentioned Ian, but for a while they were really trying to put three together with probably disappointment on all sides.
Yeah, thank you.
More?
I didn't know that. No, that's fine.
Okay.
Well, yeah, you can give what you've been doing since you retired from Arthur D. Little.
Oh,
if anything.
yes. I worked for Arthur D. Little for 26 years. Left in '88 under happy terms to set up my own consultancy in Noblesboro, Maine. Working sometimes with Arthur D. Little as an outside expert, and other times working directly for clients. And I continued this until just a few years ago when I realized it was time to not chase money anymore, stop writing invoices, stop pursuing things, and just do it would be fun. So I keep my hand in now through the desalination community by burrowing around in the ancient history and industrial archaeology of the technology and the industry.
But Jim, you can mention that you're also a journal, right?
And yes, I am the chairman of the peer review board of the IDA Journal of Desalination and Water Reuse. And I was too modest to even bring up the fact that I was the first president of the IDA.
I was going to mention that too.
Yeah, well,
Yes.
in Bermuda.
I wasn't going to mention that.
Oh, we have to
No,
mention that.
I was going to let you mention it.
Okay.
First elected president in
First elected
1985.
president.
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you. Pat, you were a working stiff when I first met you.
I think I still am.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Okay. If you'd like to know well, I think what your audience is going to find out very quickly is that we've known each other all for a long time. And I'm not going to hide the numbers. Let's just say it outright, Ian. We've known each other 40 years, all of us here. That's a long time. So we know each other's history backwards and forwards. But to get to my beginning, and when you talk about a happy accident and no career planning, I suppose I could say the same thing. I started out at Avco, which was an aerospace electronics company, and working in the marketing research department. And they decided that maybe it was time to diversify. And when they diversified, one of the projects they were looking at was water purification. So that sounded good to me. So I decided to follow that team, which is the process that they were looking at was freezing. So that's where we started getting involved, and I'm doing my market research thing, and then one day my boss, Wally Johnson, says, there's a group of people gathering in Washington, D.C., and we're going to argue about the dates on this, I'll bet, but it was 1972, as I recall it, at the DuPont Plaza in Washington. I went down, lollipop and balloon, with a bunch of mostly Californian people, sitting there, and I came back and I was actively involved in the formation of the then NWSIA, the National Water Supply Improvement Association. The name came about and we started to have our first conference and so on. It was several years later with a president, Larry Snell, out of Florida, I believe, who said, you know, this volunteer thing all on our own is not working quite well. How would you like to take on the role of executive director? They weren't ready to pay me anything really, but that's okay. So I'm doing this in between, and then I must have done a decent enough job. They decided they were going to start to pay me. So as you say, that was the beginning of the NWSIA and my introduction into IDA. And then as Jim and you have alluded to, it was in 1985 that we merged with the IDEA, and we became the IDA. And my position with them now is the illustrious title of Secretary General. I frankly like Executive Director better. But in any event,
we'll lobby for you, Patricia.
Thank you. But I mean, I think, I'm not sure, I'm still here, I'm still working, I'm not retired. So I'm not sure where you want me to go after that.
That's good. We'll pick up the pieces in a little bit. Larry Snell, incidentally, when he was president, was also my boss at
Really?
Sanibel.
Okay.
Yes, Sanibel.
He was the general manager of the Island Water Association.
that was-
He hired me to go down to Sanibel.
Did he really?
Yeah.
No, that was the first conference I organized, was in Sanibel, Sarasota.
Sarasota. Yeah, that was in
And
1978.
78, I think,
78, yeah.
So that was the first one I did.
Yeah.
Who organized the San Diego?
77,
77
Del
was San
Coronado.
Diego,
It was
yeah.
still done by NWSIA, but they didn't have a formal structure.
Okay.
You know,
The California gang organized.
for the most part,
Yeah.
Orange County.
Actually, the Sarasota meeting was very interesting because I was in charge of arranging the tours of plants, which is not a big challenge. Even in those days, it wasn't a big challenge because we had a number of plants down the West Coast. But what was interesting is that it rained for the entire outing.
Oh, yes.
And all of our foreign visitors said, why do you need brackish water desal in Florida when it rains all the time? And I said, well, because right under the surface in Florida, we have this rock sheath called coquina. The water hits it and runs up on one side into the Gulf and the other side into Atlantic, and not a whole lot penetrates underneath. So we have a very little surface water retention in Florida. It's mostly wells, and when it goes down into the ground, it gets brackish.
Well, you know, we've got a history, too, where wherever we hold our conferences, at least in IDA for sure, they could be in droughts for years, but when we come to town, it rains.
Yeah,
It
absolutely.
floods,
Absolutely.
usually. Yeah, so.
Leon, tell us a little bit about your background.
I think in difference to both of my friends, I kind of methodically went to after desalination. I graduated in Warsaw from Warsaw Technical University in '62, and joined a group which was dealing with desalinating of coal mine water. And in Poland, in southern Poland, coal mines were a major issue, and the water which came out from the ground during the digging operation was very saline. And so I was part of the team working with United Nations on desalination of those waters. Then in '67, I went as a tourist to United States, and then soon after, a week after, I got a job with Baldwin Lima Hamilton, which was at the time one of the leaders of the desalination industry. There were three companies, Aquachem, BLH, and Westinghouse. That's what the three major players in desalination. In '67, I got a job. I stayed ever since in the United States. And in '72, I joined Bechtel. And remember, you too worked for Bechtel at one time, Ian. Bechtel retreated me from Aquachem. I was in Italy, and my friend Al Rogers told me, you have to come to San Francisco. I said, no, I'm in Italy operating the first MED plant of Aquachem. I have time, I'm enjoying here. But then I went to San Francisco and I was sold. San Francisco was a beautiful place. So they said, no, you cannot come to San Francisco. First you go to run research and development of the Freeport, Texas facility. So I told them I would go only for a year. And anyway, after 9 months, they brought me back to Bechtel. In 73, then being with Bechtel, they sent me to the first meeting of NWSIA in Key Largo, Key West, Key Largo. And then, as you, Ian, will remember, Easy Newsbaum from the floor decided that the gang who created NWSIA and nominated its director is not right. And then from the floor, he nominated between other Ian and me to the board, and then we got elected.
No, not me.
You were not there?
No, I was appointed chairman of the nominating committee.
Oh,
so it was my slate.
Oh, your slate
Izzy
was overturned. Anyway, Herb Sliger got
And Herb Sliger.
And do you remember
I
the
got-
power was going out all the time
Yeah,
we were there?
oh, yeah, yeah,
and we
yeah.
had Prince
So
Faisal
the
there.
Prince
Prince
was
Faisal
sitting
was there.
Nabil Al-Ramli.
No.
Anyway, that's the beginning of my involvement with NWSA. I got elected in 73 in Key Largo. That's through the years, I think, just trying to remember all the important steps. We obviously, in about 80, started to talk about merger, because some of them, like Jim and I, got on both directorship. I was on IDEA and WSIA. So from 81, we were starting to drive 82, driving for the merger. We had a conference in Washington that was, you know that I have no problem with talking, but that first conference which I was running, I was trembling inside. It was
You
in
were?
Washington,
I never knew that.
You're talking learning by experience. So in 1980, we had Washington conference in the first Washington conference.
Yeah, in 81.
81. And then I think the merger, one of the claims to my history is that I and Chris Burroughs were fathers of IDA Constitution.
That's right.
And we fought for the Constitution of IDA word by word for 2 years until the merger agreement occurred in 84 in Orlando.
And if you remember, you and Chris Burroughs were not exactly on the same page with a lot of things, which probably made the Constitution make a lot more sense because they came from it from different approaches. And,
Yeah, I represented the NWSIA, he represented the IDEA, International Desalting and Environmental Association. And we hammered, I'm not kidding,
Hammered.
word by word. So this constitution survived since then to this day without any major changes of constitution. We changed bylaws. So that was interesting. Then obviously working with Bechtel, I had a lot of involvement in desalination because I was doing R&D on desalination and,
Excuse me a
and
minute, Leo.
renewable energy, and so since then.
Excuse me a minute, Leo.
Yeah,
You and Chris worked on the Constitution for a long time.
2 years at least.
And the agreement was finally, to use your words, hammered out in 84, but it did not become official until 1985. Is that correct?
No, the agreement was signed and agreed, and the procedure for a new organization started from 85. So that's how Jim got elected to be first elected. But the Constitution was written in 84, was approved in 84 by both organizations. Part of the agreement was two things. Creation of NWSIA, because before was WSIA, really, the were name, to return to original name of NWSIA. And second was Chanabasapa Scholarship. The money which was left from IDA, they didn't want to go to the new IDA organization. So we took the pool of money, about $120,000, $130,000.
$140,000.
Or $140,000. And we created scholarship, Chanabasapa Scholarship, which leads to discussion, obviously, on membrane development. You know, he was the driving force in the government on desalination.
But
At some point
it was
in
1 year.
there were joint
Yeah.
presidents.
Yes.
There's Ford
Yeah, so
Miller,
from
Innis and Jan Jr.
84,
Right.
in 84, after Orlando, until 85, there was joint presidency. Floyd Miller was president of NWSIA, but joint president of IDA.
Right.
And Issam Jamjum of SWIC was the president, co-president. And all the officers, and I at that time was vice president of NWSIA, all the officers from both organizations become interim officer. So in our constitution, there's a chapter of interim period, which shows how it
And
was.
Ian, for my part, the Secretary General or whatever you were, there were two offices. One was in Glasgow, Scotland, which was more or less the European offices, and then there was ours here in Topsfield. And then there was, during that year, an evaluation to decide where the headquarters was actually going to be. And so they had a committee go to Scotland and come here to Topsfield to evaluate where would be the best, who would be best running it, and that's how it came.
It was a big battle on the subject. Ultimately, Topsfield or Patricia prevailed, became of record executive director of IDA. Now, since the 85, NWSIA had independent organization under the Constitution. Each of the affiliate is independent organization operating on their own constitution and bylaws. But clearly, NWSIA at the merger was the only affiliate. Then later, the negotiation, as Jim pointed out, brought the European Federation, and they didn't really want it until they were forced to create the European Desalination Society, and that became an affiliate of IDA with long history.
If I can interrupt for a moment.
Yeah, of course.
And just a comparison between the way life was under NWSIA versus when it became international, such a different group of players and things that you're dealing with. It's very different. I long for those days when we could just organize a meeting or a conference in the United States. The personalities, the culture, and the language does not enter into it. For the most part, most of us speak English. He doesn't speak English.
Cheers, yeah.
Anyway.
The idea is that NWSA had international arms involvement.
A little bit. They had
clearly.
a committee.
Because
Well, that's why the N was dropped.
Yes,
Right.
yes, yes.
But if you remember in Coronado, which is 77, early meeting.
We had international, of
We
course.
had international. That's the first desalination seawater area contract was signed
That's right.
by our friends, and if you remember Jim Kruver,
Yeah.
Seymour, Kramer, and so on. The people who had the first contract in Jeddah to build large desalination. And Polymetrics independently had a large project going. But the international part of NWSIA was right from beginning, and not the first year or two, although in first meeting or first conference.
What we had
Well, the
was,
concept was originally floated by Don Owen and Neil Klein
Correct.
at a meeting that we had at the Disney Hotel, which was a symposium on brackish water desalination. And they had just, OSW was closing up shop. They had just built their demonstration plant at Fountain
In
Valley.
73, under Nixon administration, the OSW ceased to
Right.
exist.
Right.
And then recreated as a Office of Water
Yeah, and
Research, OWRT.
the question was put to the audience, would there be an interest in creating this organization? And one of my clients was the guy from the State Water Resources Board in Montana, and he was one of the early presidents of Noisia.
who was that?
I'm trying to remember his
From
name.
where? What?
Montana.
Oklahoma, not Oklahoma.
No, we had Oklahoma as well.
Oklahoma, we had a meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I got a direct honors
Yeah.
director at
Yeah.
that time.
I'll look back
Montana.
at some of the old newsletters. I've got them in the
Yeah.
office. But that was, and then the organizational meeting, or the official organizational meeting, I guess, was held at the DuPont Circle Hotel.
But, I remember Don Owen and the Orange County people
Yeah.
coming to Freeport, Texas in 73, because I was there already, as I told you, the development engineer on MED, MSF, advanced technology, and Freeport, Texas was one, like Wrightsville Beach, Freeport, Texas was the major OSW test facility.
Yeah,
and
Roswell.
they came to, in 73, I don't remember the months, and clearly talk about, let's get moving to unite everybody to talk about
But if you want,
desalination.
I would like to give credit publicly anyway, if you haven't already, in your series, for the beginning of what is now AMPTA and for what is now IDA, we need to go back to what I would call the real pioneers, which is Bill Warren. I don't know if you talked about him
Bill
at all.
Warren,
Boy, he was
he
putting
was
behind that.
But Bill Warren,
Don Owen.
Don Owen was really the guy
Right.
who started it. And he had worked for Bill Warren
Yeah.
at Department of Water
Right.
Resources.
Correct.
And he brought Bill in to the
Yeah,
equation.
I would say the
Which was
Orange
a very
County
smart
people
move.
Orange County was definitely behind it
all the way.
They,
And
they
they- yeah.
supported it financially in the beginning.
For years.
Yes, I mean
years.
they brought the money into
As
it.
the office was
staff,
in Orange
The
County.
office
and
was
all
in
of that.
Orange County.
But I'm just saying, I think we owe the beginnings of a lot of that too, and it should not be recognized by both of those
Yeah,
people.
Bill Warren and Don Owen. Right.
And then
And then Neil
just
Klein, of course.
Neil Klein came
along,
after that,
too.
and he was.
Yeah.
But on top of it, what is now legislation group, and it was Bill Warner, because I succeeded him years later when he retired to chair the legislative group in Washington. And, but Bill Warren clearly was all the way until his death really involved with NWSIA and activities.
And one of the early, or at least I think the Orange County people wanted to have this facet of the organization. They wanted it to have the ability to lobby.
Yes.
They did.
Yes, and we went against that. We did have legislative workshops, which were held, God knows why, in Washington in February. You know you're going to get a snowstorm. But that was when it was targeted and set, that we would have these legislative workshops. So they kept the arm in a little bit, but we were officially not lobbying.
Right.
I'd sort of expand on that a little bit. No, we were not in the formal sense of the term lobbying, but at the same time, we owed a great deal to the federal government. I mean, in so many ways, the old Office of Saline Water was supporting us in direct research grants and in other things that we had to stay close to the old OSW and then OWRT.
No, because money
and
was
so this I think what some people call lobbying in a negative term, I think was just
Advocacy.
doing the right thing on behalf of everybody.
Oh,
In fact, on behalf of everybody internationally because of the generosity of OSW.
Well, that's how we wind up with Senator Simon,
Yep.
and who really put the legislation in the Congress to support later OWRT and put money in federal government to continue research. Because after Nixon administration, the government stopped funding and they closed all the facilities.
They had a small funding stream for OWRT for a couple of years.
Right.
And then they moved the whole thing to the Bureau of Reclamation.
Yes.
Correct.
Who were much more interested in building dams.
Correct.
You know, I was just thinking there's another link, and you can refresh me on this. There was the U.S. and
Geological Survey.
no, the one with Bonnie Pounds. Bonnie Pounds. It was there
that's
was
it.
a link. JCOR.
Yeah.
JCOR,
So
that's
there
it.
still was the U.S. government was still involved, and you want to explain that either of
No,
you?
but JCOR was the Economic Commission of Cooperation between Saudi Arabia and United States on desalination specifically. And so Bureau was involved in that, but JCOR was a separate group. And they have a major program to basically build a research facility in Jubail to this day. And so you are right. JCOR had another government program which helped desalination worldwide.
Well, it was from that I wanted. Can I lead into something else?
Yeah, sure.
No, it was because I was thinking about
This
Jim.
is your show, guys.
No, Jim, because it was. I threw Jim.
If I like it, we'll take you on the road.
No, it was from the governor at SWIC, Abdullah Al-Galega. He wanted to, and use this was the JCOR money that he used to get a group of individuals who. We're not talking commercial people. We were talking the public utility
But
people.
the tour.
The tour. Out to the camels. You know, that part. You know, I'm not going to tell you about the camels part. That's
Yeah, that's a separate story.
Or coming out of the tent.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had to go get the water. Remember?
May I give the same subject a try?
Go ahead, try, because
What was the year would that have been? It was in
early 80s.
early 80s.
At least. I was a blushing young thing then.
It was somehow the concept came up at SWIC that we would like to bring over a group of non-commercial people from the States to see what we've done
In Saudi Arabia.
and what we're trying to do and what our challenges are, and just so we can be a little bit more appreciated, and the reality of water in Saudi Arabia can be a little more widely known. So this motley crew was assembled.
But Bill Warner was.
Two of them over here, but including people from Orange
Utilities.
County, Bill Warren. As a stroke of inspiration, they invited a Southern California date farmer.
Yes, the dates.
And Aubrey Watts from Virginia Beach.
Oh, yes.
So we had let's say a dozen people, 10 or a dozen people, who had a tour of East Coast, West Coast, Central Saudi Arabia. And when the conversation would lag, we'd trot out the date farmer.
From California.
From California. Because the Saudis are nuts about dates. And so this guy whose name I forget.
I forgot, but I know the area of California.
He'd start talking this
Date language.
intricacies of date language and varieties and soils and watering.
They are doing.
And this was the thing that really kept the conversation from lagging. We could
It
always
never lagged.
shift to dates. But it was a great fun. And
You didn't explain about the sheep and the camels.
I won't.
No, that's too complicated.
Okay, we won't
We're
go
not
there.
talking about that.
All right.
It was often hoped that the same group would be invited back 10 years later to see what changes had been made, but that never.
What about your code sign? Your code sign. You know what you're supposed to do when you meet with the leg. The camels, you had to hold your leg up when you met each other.
Oh well. These are
This can be edited out.
these are inside jokes pertaining to bodily functions. I don't really think we have to.
Okay. Needless to say, I was the only woman, and you're in Saudi Arabia, so it's different.
Yeah, but maybe to adding to the history of NWSIA, which is important, we had the negotiation meeting, you kind of brought it up, all over the world. Mm-hmm. Because both groups were meeting in Berlin, in Paris, and each board of that brought together, day and night discussion. And the final discussion, which I for sure remember, in Orlando, lasted to 3 o'clock in the morning. And our famous friend Gordon Leitner got so mad with intransigence of our partners on the IDEA that about 2 o'clock, he said, "Hell with you," and walked out from the meeting.
He said more than that.
Yeah, but and so some of us prevailed, and after 3 o'clock, we finally signed and initialed the agreement of the merger of the two organizations. And that was really a major break. So what was interesting, and I think for history is important, that one of the motivation was to reduce number of conferences. And we used to have every year NWSIA conference, and Dr. Burkett, with his side, had every year IDEA conference. And so the material those days wasn't sufficient enough to justify double annual events. And so one of the driving forces was who make the major event, which became IDA Congress, only every 2 years. And so the negotiations were important. We settled, and I think since then, NWSIA, so I remember, Ian, when I voted for you to become president of ADA, American Desalination Association, before. We were in San Antonio. Remember that?
Yep.
And you became Jack Jurgensen was the first secretary, and then we changed him. At the same time, we made you a president.
Well, that was.
I am sure it's San Antonio.
No, that was in San Diego. It was in San Diego. See, at San Diego, we had a retreat, if you remember.
Right, that was a retreat.
And it was the facilitator was somebody that Bill Mills from the Orange County Water District had brought in. And after the retreat, the OJ was the president at the time.
OJ, okay.
After the retreat, during the summary, it was proposed by I'm not sure if it was the facilitator or if it was Bill Mills as a result of something the facilitator had said to him, but they recommended that Jack and B be dismissed.
Right.
And that the association didn't need an executive director, which was his title at the time. And that was, OJ resigned as president, if you recall.
Because...
And actively supported the start of CETA in Florida, which, was an attempt to drum up some opposition to Noisia. And I think it was the following year we were in San Antonio.
San Antonio, that's what I...
Following year, we were in San Antonio when you nominated me to be president.
Right, so that I... And then you lasted as a president for quite a number of years. 2 years only?
4 years.
4 years.
Nobody else wanted the job. I couldn't give it away.
You give it away. No, this reminds me, Mr. Makhzoumi, Fuad Makhzoumi, who got elected to presidency of IDA, and in our constitution says you cannot be re-elected, But he said, who cares about this paper? I want to be president for life. No, he didn't succeed, but that's part of our history of IDA, which really tries to play by democratic rule, which Doug will tell you all about it.
Moving on from the formation and the selection of Topsfield as the headquarters for the association, it grew not really rapidly, but at a nice pace, and then really started to take off at some point when your membership increased, I think up to about 2,000.
It's over that now, of course.
And that was like the late 80s, early 90s. You added affiliates. Mm-hmm. And can you just tell us a little bit about that process, how the affiliate process and what it means? And
well, I think originally, the combinations of where I was working out of my house for a while, and then, as you say, as the membership grew, I think we started to gain some recognition as the go-to organization. We, had a wide reach and breadth of people. So our membership grew, and then therefore our headquarters grew as well. Obviously I was the only person at one point in time. We've grown from that to the offices that you see here today. But yes, it was a slow growth period. On the affiliates, it was recognized that we would act as, the international body, so to speak, but that each of you had absolute validity. And I think at the time of the Constitution, and I know Leon's going to comment on that I think we said that there would be at least 5 affiliates that would be like the grandfathered in group. Was WISIA, the American group, the European group, and I forgot what the other one was. But we had about 4 or 5 that were grandfathered in. And I think that to date, we have had, we've had our ups and downs over the periods, but there's relevance to each of these groups. They don't all focus exclusively on desalination. Example, AMPTA looks at membranes exclusively. You look at WISTA, they look at a much broader topic of water sciences. So each of them brings in something. It's not necessarily focused exclusively on desalination. And with continued cooperation, I think that we've done very well on that.
As Doug probably knows, because he was chairman
how many affiliates are there now?
13.
13?
Doug knows the affiliate because he was chairman of the affiliate committee for quite a number of years. The Constitution clearly encourages creation of affiliates. Okay, we had initially pretty simplistic rule to acquire new affiliates. We strengthened the requirements because without really proliferation of affiliates became. So we are now pushing to regional affiliation first. Example point is that Spanish really didn't want to join European, we wanted to join IDA. And so we had a major struggle. And today the rules are such that if a local country wants to join IDA, first we'll push to the original affiliate. For example, PACTA is relatively new affiliate, Asia Pacific Asia Pacific Desalination Association. So Korean recently created. They will approach us, but we'll most probably send them first to ABDA to join. But what the important is the strengths in the affiliation adds to ability of IDA to influence or spread the technology worldwide. And I think we are now, I don't think, about 2,400 members in IDA.
25.
If you add all the affiliates, we're probably reaching probably around 7,000 people. So it has become a major force and the topic of desalination, basically membrane or thermal still, is really spreading on every conference, water conference there exists.
I mean, the affiliates still have the autonomy. I mean, it's not like a chapter. The way we have it structured here is each of the affiliates is autonomous. They have their own way of doing things and report. They have to have agree to what some of the things that we support.
Joint objectives.
But we also have directors on our board that are representative from the affiliates. So it brings together, I think, a mindset, a group of people that we can share and that we can work with, and we help cross memberships, cross conferences by promotion of each other's activities. So, I mean, from that standpoint, I think it's a win-win situation.
The point is that IDA is growing, as you mentioned. I mean, we are growing historically. We are undertaking new activities. Example of that, we now created, humanitarian relation activity, which is new. We are doing conference specifically. The profit of it goes for humanitarian support. We've created now the Desalination Academy, which the objective is, the IDA Desalination Academy objective is to spread the technology on all levels, from operators, which is done, and AMPTA is doing a lot of the workshop. But we are pushing the level to the level of getting degrees going through the academy. So we will have discussion with universities about getting accreditation for the academy. So whoever student takes a set of courses through the academy can get a degree or at least credits in their studies at university. So to kind of draw the picture, we are continuously growing. But what is important, that desalination as such dramatically raise in importance around the world. And you look at every water conference, there's no conference without subject on desalination. Yeah.
At some point, one of the, as you mentioned, one of the names under which AMPTA has existed during its history was the American Desalting Association. We found that to be ineffective in attracting new members because desalting per se was not something that was well recognized in the US and Canada, and most people thought it referred only to seawater. Mm-hmm. So we changed the name. At some point, because you're now into a lot of other things other than desalting, do you think that IDA will change to the International Desalination and Water Reuse Association?
As a matter of fact, that was presented. We had a strategic 5-year plan that was put out, and that was one of the items, one of the points that were brought up, but it was put down. I don't know. I know that several people are in favor of doing that, but the idea that we were going to add into it was the environmental angle. In other words, go back to the
IDEA.
But we didn't feel
that
we didn't feel we had enough credibility to say that we were an environmental association. And I think I happen to feel that.
You'd have a problem doing that.
Yeah, I just don't think it works.
But let me add to that. If you look at what's happening now in U.S. even, primarily with shale gas, with the issue of flowback and disposal of petroleum and gas industry water, which is leading to zero discharge reuse of the water, it is broader than membrane. It clearly requires for zero discharge get back into the desalination and distillation, and it's clearly environmental because all of that is.
But we're not the experts.
We're in the same position that we were back in the 70s and 80s. I mean, there are associations that represent that industry.
Exclusively. yeah.
Exclusively.
Yeah.
So if you start muscling in on their territory, as it were, we're going to find the same thing. Doug and his folks says, we don't want to go to 2 conferences on the same subject. So Jim?
I support the concept of having very clear fences and boundaries around what you do. Do not confuse the customer as to who you are. So adding environmental, I'm not sure that's such a good idea. Which makes me think of another topic is, do you define yourself by application or by technology? IDA just as desalination, any technology coming along, membrane, thermal,
Whatever.
Lord knows what. I worry if EMTA may someday, confronted by a new desalination technology which does not use membranes, I don't know what it will be, but let's say the new one comes down the road. Do you just rule yourselves out, or do you change your name? And because you I think we've non-parallel definitions of the 2 associations. One is by a component, and the other is by an application,
Right.
or a third could be by the form of energy input. But you want to be pretty clear, not only to
What you
yourself,
do.
but so the rest of the world understands.
Well, we've had actually, and this is something that gets more and more difficult every year as everybody starts their own associations. We had ADA, which is American Dental Association, and we've frequently got communication that was addressed to the American Dental Association. Now we're the American Massage Therapy Association.
That's even
And
tougher.
there is actually an
Why not?
organization called that. So, whatever you change your name to,
I think it's actually
Be
not the
careful.
American massage. It's the adult massage.
The fact is, Ian,
this is your closing statement, Leon.
Yeah, closing.
I am closing to is simple, is the desalination industry as such is clearly growing. And we as an association, both EMTA, IDA, and all other affiliates have a major role to promote, to develop, and advance the desalination to the point that we will provide water to all the people of the world at reasonable and sustainable price and environmentally sustainable. So our goal have to continue to look for new ideas, new technology to provide water for all the people of the globe.
Well, I would probably echo what Leon has said too. And just in summary, I would agree that we are growing, and our job here is to get the word out to everybody, both the people who may not believe that we can do what we can do, that we can do it effectively, safely, going along that way. What we all know in the world today is the population is growing and the water supplies are dwindling. We're here for a reason. We're here to clean up those streams and to do what we can. We say desalination is not the only alternative. It is one of the only viable alternatives in some cases, in some locations. Consider us.
Yeah. Jim, you're the de facto historian of the technologies and the association. Why don't you close with some historical facts?
Historical facts. I could bore you to death for hours on this. I think it's a shame that more people don't understand that desalination does have a long and lusty history involving some pretty fantastic corporations and some pretty strange individuals. And over the years, it's developed its own culture, its own way of doing things, and these have been developed in response to the prevailing economic and environmental conditions. These driving factors are going to change in the future. I think of desalination as the large picture. It's not only the forest, not the trees. It becomes, you have to think of desalination as a complete ecosystem involving the manufacturers, the suppliers, the researchers, the designers, the utilities, and even the end customers, and they all interact. And the way they interact has developed a certain way over the years, and it's going to change in the future. But you study any ecosystem, you have to study its history and the paleology of that ecosystem in order to understand how we are where we are now.
Evolving.
And so I think people should, I'm just preaching now, be more cognizant of a fascinating past. And it is fascinating, and if you want to see how fascinating, just come to some of my lectures at congresses.
That, Ian, just
We're done.
it really calls for recognition what AMTA is doing right now to record the history, record the pioneers, and I think it's important for everybody to learn, and that's part of the history of desalination in this country or really around the world.
And we owe you thanks for that.
One of the things that started us down this road was precipitated in large part by the fact that over the years I've noticed that when I attended conferences, a lot of the young engineers who were presenting papers never had a reference more than 5 years old. And I thought, this is ridiculous. I mean, they're referencing work that they've done as graduate students and work that their professors have done before them and maybe a couple other people on the outside. But what about all those that went before? And I thought it was important when I suggested this program to the board that we, as the North American affiliate of IDA, memorialize the work that led to the point where these young engineers could go to a conference and make a presentation.
Yeah.
So it's our hope that they'll take the time to look at the website and educate themselves.
Well, we certainly thank you for
Very much.
AMTA taking
Thank
this
you
very much.
initiative.
Once again, thanks very much, and I'd like to thank you, Pat, for allowing us to use your really nice facilities
Thank you.
and your personal office.